My name is Daniel Harris. I'm 27, from Chicago, and this is the story I've never told anyone. I call it, She Caught Me Looking at Her Lips and Said, They're Not Off Limits. It all began in the most ordinary place imaginable. An office lit by fluorescent lights, the hum of printers, and the clack of keyboards filling the silence between strained conversations. I'd been working at Westward & Company, a mid-sized consulting firm, for almost 2 years, living the kind of life where every day blurred into the next. Coffee at 7, commute at 8, meetings at 9, and a dull ache in the chest that never seemed to leave. Then came her. Her name was Clare Donovan. She was 29, recently transferred from the Toronto branch, and had that presence. The kind that made people lower their voices when she entered a room, not out of fear but awe. She had soft brown hair tied loosely, like she never cared enough to perfect it, and eyes the color of late autumn, somewhere between hazel and green, depending on the light. The first time I noticed her lips was during a Monday meeting. She was sitting across from me, speaking to the room about client relations, but I barely heard her words. My gaze lingered, unwilling, almost guilty, on the curve of her mouth. She noticed. She always noticed. That was Claire's gift. Reading people, dissecting their intentions, peeling back their masks. After the meeting ended, I stayed behind, gathering papers just to avoid walking out with the group. That's when I felt her presence beside me. She leaned in, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "You were staring at my lips?" she said, matter of fact, not angry, not playful, just aware. I froze. My throat went dry. I wasn't. Her eyes held mine, unblinking. Then, almost imperceptibly, her lips curled. "Don't worry, Daniel. They're not off limits." The words hit me like a shot of whiskey, burning, intoxicating, dangerous. Before I could respond, she walked away, her heels echoing against the linoleum like punctuation marks to a sentence I couldn't finish. That moment replayed in my head for days, carving itself into my thoughts while I tried to pretend nothing had changed. But everything had. Our interactions grew stranger, more charged. At first, it was glances in hallways, subtle brushes of hands when exchanging files, conversations that lingered just a little too long. Then came the late nights. One evening, long after most of the office had emptied, I was working on a client presentation when I realized she was still there. Claire sat in her cubicle, tapping her pen against her notebook. She caught me looking again. "You should go home," I said, my voice carrying too much concern. "Maybe I like it better here," she replied without looking up. "Home isn't always home." I didn't know what she meant then, but her words carried a heaviness, like unspoken confessions. Minutes passed before she stood, walked to my desk, and leaned over my shoulder to look at my laptop screen. The scent of her perfume, a faint trace of vanilla and something sharper, flooded my senses. "You're overcomplicating it," she whispered, pointing at a line in the presentation. Her hand brushed mine. I didn't move it. "Maybe," I murmured, my pulse quickening. Her lips were inches from my ear. "You think too much, Daniel. Sometimes you just let go." The air between us felt electric, a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. For a fleeting second, I thought she would kiss me, but she didn't. She pulled back, her eyes glimmering with something unreadable, and left without saying goodbye. The weeks that followed blurred into a mix of stolen moments and growing tension. We never acknowledged it out loud, but it was there, an undercurrent of something dangerous, something neither of us could fully name. Until the night everything cracked open. We were at a company dinner, the kind where people pretend to like each other over expensive wine. Claire sat beside me, her laughter louder than usual, her hand brushing against mine under the table more times than coincidence allowed. "Why do you do that?" I finally whispered, leaning closer so no one else could hear. "Do what?" she asked, feigning innocence. "Toy with me." She tilted her head, her eyes locking onto mine. "And if I am?" Before I could answer, the dinner was interrupted by my older brother, Mark. I hadn't seen him in months, but there he was, walking into the restaurant like he owned the place. A corporate lawyer, all confidence and charm. The kind of man people noticed without trying. He was there with his firm, seated just across the room from us. When Claire saw him, her expression shifted. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked unsettled. She excused herself, claiming a call, and didn't return for 20 minutes. When she did, her laughter was forced, her eyes darting toward Mark's table like shadows were chasing her. Later, when the dinner ended and we stepped outside, I asked her about it. "You know him, don't you?" I said. Her pause was too long. Finally, she nodded. "Yes." "How?" She hesitated, then whispered, "It's complicated." That was all she gave me. But in her eyes, I saw something I couldn't unsee: fear. That night, I lay awake, the city's hum outside my window doing nothing to quiet the storm in my mind. Who was Claire, really? And what was her connection to Mark? The next morning, my brother called me out of the blue. We hadn't spoken properly in months, and his voice carried a strange weight. "Daniel," he said, "we need to talk. It's about someone you work with. Claire Donovan." My stomach dropped. How the hell did he know her name? When my brother Mark called me that morning, his voice sounded heavier than I remembered, laced with a caution I didn't quite understand. "Claire Donovan," he repeated slowly, as if testing how it would land. "She works with you, doesn't she?" I tried to sound casual. "Yeah." "Why?" There was silence on the line, broken only by the faint hiss of traffic behind him. Then he said, "Stay away from her, Daniel. She's trouble." I almost laughed. "That's rich coming from you." But his tone sharpened. "I'm serious. You don't know what you're dealing with." I wanted to press him, demand explanations, but the line went dead. He hung up before I could say another word. The rest of that day at the office, I couldn't look at Claire without hearing his warning echo in my mind. And yet, the harder I tried to ignore her, the more aware of her I became. The way she leaned over her desk, the way her lips pursed when she was concentrating. Every detail drew me in. By late afternoon, I gave up pretending. I walked to her cubicle. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Her hazel green eyes flickered with something unreadable. "About my brother, Mark. He knows you." She froze for the slightest second. Then she stood, smoothing the front of her blouse like she needed a moment to gather herself. "Not here. After work." We met at a quiet bar tucked into the corner of the city. One of those places with dim lighting, wooden booths, and the kind of bartender who doesn't ask questions. Claire ordered red wine. I stuck to whiskey. She didn't waste time. "Yes, I know Mark. Years ago, when I was still in Toronto, we dated. Briefly." Her voice was calm, but her fingers trembled against the wine glass. "Dated?" I repeated, the word bitter in my mouth. She nodded. "It wasn't serious. But Mark, he doesn't let go easily. When it ended badly." I leaned in. "Badly how?" She hesitated. "He threatened to ruin my career if I ever crossed him again. He told me I'd regret leaving." My pulse pounded. This was typical Mark, controlling, vindictive. Growing up, I'd seen him twist people to his will, manipulate situations until everyone danced to his tune. But hearing it from Claire made something inside me burn. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. She looked me straight in the eye. "Because I thought I could handle it. And because you're different from him. I didn't want you to judge me through his shadow." I should have been angry, but instead, all I felt was a strange, protective ache. The days that followed blurred into something like a fever dream. Mark started showing up more often, at the office, at places I went out to eat, even outside my apartment one night. Always with that smug smile, always pretending his presence was coincidence. "You don't know her like I do," he told me once, his tone almost taunting. "She'll ruin you, Daniel. She'll take everything you've worked for and burn it down." But every time I looked at Claire, I didn't see ruin. I saw fragility wrapped in armor. I saw someone who had been hurt and learned to wear sharp edges as defense. And against all logic, I wanted her. Our relationship crossed a line one night after another late shift. We stayed behind, working through the silence of an empty office, the city lights sprawling out beyond the windows. She came over to my desk to check a report, and our shoulders brushed. Neither of us pulled away. Her lips hovered inches from mine. I whispered, "Claire." She cut me off with a kiss. Sudden, desperate, like she had been holding her breath for weeks and finally exhaled. Her mouth was warm, urgent, tasting faintly of wine and secrets. When we finally broke apart, her forehead rested against mine. "I shouldn't," she whispered. "I don't care," I replied, my voice shaking. That was the night we crossed from unspoken tension into something irreversible. But the deeper we sank, the more dangerous it became. One evening, as we left the office together, Mark was waiting outside. He leaned casually against his car, a knowing smile on his face. "Well," he said, his voice dripping with mockery, "isn't this cozy?" Claire stiffened beside me, her hand tightening around mine. "Go home, Mark," I snapped, but he stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough for only us to hear. "She'll never tell you the whole story, little brother. Ask her what happened in Toronto. Ask her why she really left." Claire's face went pale, but she said nothing. That night, as we sat in my apartment, I tried to press her. "What did he mean, Claire? What's he not telling me?" Her eyes glistened. "Please, Daniel, don't dig into the past. You won't like what you find." The way she said it chilled me, and yet I couldn't let it go. Over the next few days, I made some calls, reaching out to old contacts in Toronto. Eventually, someone from Claire's previous firm spoke off the record. The story they told didn't align with Claire's version. It wasn't just a breakup. There had been accusations, allegations of misconduct at work, whispers of betrayal, and rumors that Claire had left Toronto under a cloud of scandal. Mark had been involved somehow, but the details were blurred, conflicting, wrapped in layers of gossip and fear. When I confronted Claire, she broke. Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes, some of it is true. I made mistakes. I trusted the wrong people. But I never," her voice cracked, "I never meant for it to get that far." Her confession should have pushed me away, but instead it pulled me deeper. Because beneath her shame, I saw her humanity. Her flaws made her real. Still, the question clawed at me. Was she the victim of Mark's manipulation? Or was there more to her story than she was willing to admit? One night, weeks later, everything came to a head. I came home late to find Mark sitting in my apartment, uninvited, a glass of my whiskey in his hand. Claire was there too, standing by the window, her arms crossed. The air felt poisonous. Mark smiled thinly. "Finally, now we can all be honest." I looked between them, my chest tightening. "What the hell is this?" Claire's lips parted, but no words came. Mark set down his glass, leaned back, and said with a smirk, "Tell him the truth, Claire. Tell him what you never told me either." Her face drained of color, and in that silence, in the way her hands trembled, I knew something enormous was about to unravel. The silence in my apartment that night was unbearable. Claire by the window, pale and trembling. Mark in my chair, smug and patient. And me, standing between them, my chest burning like a furnace. "Tell him," Mark pressed, his voice low, venomous. "Tell Daniel why you really left Toronto." Claire's lips parted. Her eyes flickered to me, pleading, as though asking for mercy before a sentence was read. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice cracking. "There was an investigation." I felt the floor shift beneath me. "Investigation," she swallowed hard. "At my old firm, a client accused me of crossing professional boundaries. It wasn't true, but Mark," she choked on his name. "Mark used it against me. He said he'd protect me, keep it buried, but only if I stayed with him." My breath caught. "You mean he blackmailed you?" Mark leaned forward, his smile cold. "That's one word for it." My fists clenched at my sides. "You bastard!" "Careful," Mark interrupted, his voice sharp. "You don't know the whole picture. She's not as innocent as you think. Ask her about the money." Claire's eyes widened. "Don't." "What money?" I demanded. Mark's gaze didn't waver. She took a payout, a quiet settlement from the firm. Enough to disappear. Enough to start over here. And she never told you. I turned to her, searching her face for denial, for something to hold on to. But her silence was answer enough. Is it true? I whispered. Tears filled her eyes. Yes. But Daniel, please. The room spun. Everything I thought I knew about her fractured in an instant. The days after that night were a blur. I stopped answering her calls. I stopped going out with friends. I showed up at work, did my tasks like a machine, and left. But she was always there, her voice echoing in meetings, her shadow lingering in the hallways. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her lips trembling as she confessed. I saw my brother's smirk. I saw the way truth and lies blended until I couldn't tell them apart. Then, one evening, I found her waiting outside my apartment. Please, Daniel, she said, her voice raw. Let me explain. I wanted to slam the door, but something in her eyes, desperation, maybe love, stopped me. So I let her in. She sat on the edge of my couch, wringing her hands. Yes, I took the money, she admitted, but I didn't do what they accused me of. I was young, stupid. I signed papers I shouldn't have. Mark saw everything. He knew I was vulnerable, and he used it. He's been using it ever since. Her voice broke. Daniel, I didn't come here to hurt you. I came here to escape him. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to, but the doubt gnawed at me. Why me then? I asked quietly. Why pull me into this mess? She looked at me, her eyes shimmering with something like truth. Because you make me feel safe. And because when you looked at me, she faltered. You didn't see my past. You saw me. Her words cut through me like glass. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, I reached for her hand. It was trembling but warm. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than rage or confusion. I felt us. We kissed again, softer this time, fragile, like we were both afraid we'd shatter. But even in that moment, I knew our story wasn't finished. Not with Mark still circling, waiting, tightening his grip. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I was called into HR. Someone had reported that Claire and I were involved. Conflict of interest, inappropriate conduct. The kind of allegations that could destroy a career. When I left the meeting, shaken, I found Mark waiting outside the building. Told you, he said simply, lighting a cigarette. She ruins everything she touches. I wanted to hit him. Instead, I whispered, Did you do this? He smirked. You'll never prove it. That night, I went to Claire's apartment. She opened the door with red, swollen eyes, holding a letter, her suspension notice. They're investigating me again, she whispered. History repeating itself. I pulled her into my arms as she broke down, her tears staining my shirt. For the first time, I realized how fragile she really was. Not the confident, unreadable woman I'd first met, but someone haunted, running, desperate to be free. We decided to fight. Together, I gathered emails, messages, anything that showed Mark's harassment. Claire gave me documents she'd kept from Toronto. Proof that the accusations were baseless, that she had been cornered into silence. It wasn't easy. Cost us friends, trust, and nearly our sanity. But piece by piece, we built a case. When it all came to a head, when Mark finally stood exposed, stripped of his power, I thought I would feel triumph. Instead, I just felt tired. Claire was cleared. My job survived. Mark vanished from our lives, swallowed by his own downfall. But the scars remained. One evening months later, Claire and I sat by Lake Michigan, watching the city lights shimmer on the water. She leaned against me and whispered, Do you regret it? Us? I thought about the chaos, the lies, the pain. And then I thought about her laughter, her lips, the way she made me feel alive when everything else felt numb. No, I said softly. Not for a second. She smiled through her tears, and I kissed her, tasting the salt of both our wounds. Looking back now, I don't know if what we had was love or just two broken souls clinging to each other. Maybe both. But I know this. Sometimes the people who shake our lives apart are the same ones who teach us what it means to truly live. And sometimes, the lips you're afraid to touch are the only ones that remind you you're still human. Months passed after the storm. The hearings ended. HR dropped their investigation. Mark disappeared into silence, a shadow of the man who once dominated every room. But victory didn't feel like victory. It felt empty, like running a marathon only to realize the finish line was just another starting point. Claire and I tried to build something normal. Breakfasts in quiet cafes, walks through the park. Even laughter, real laughter, sometimes broke through the heaviness. Yet the ghosts lingered. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night and see her staring at the ceiling, her mind somewhere far away. Sometimes she'd flinch at the sound of a phone call, as if expecting Mark's voice to crawl through the speaker. And sometimes, when she kissed me, there was a sadness beneath her lips I couldn't chase away. One evening, we sat in my apartment with the windows open, the city breathing around us. She poured 2 glasses of wine and handed me one. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" she asked softly. I smiled faintly. The meeting room, you catching me staring at your lips. Her cheeks flushed, just a little, and me saying they weren't off limits. For a moment we both laughed, but then her expression grew distant. "You know," she whispered, "sometimes I wish I could go back, not to change things, just to feel that innocence again, before everything got so heavy." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We can't go back, Claire, but maybe that's the point. We live, we break, we carry scars, and somehow we still choose each other in the end." Her eyes shimmered, and she leaned in, resting her forehead against mine. A year later, Mark sent me a letter. No return address, just his handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a single page. "You won, little brother. Or maybe you just think you did. But don't fool yourself. She'll never truly belong to you. People like her never belong to anyone." I burned it without showing Claire. For once, I refused to let him poison what we had left. Now, when I look back, I don't see just the pain or betrayal. I see the quiet nights when Claire held me like I was the only safe place in her world. I see the way her laughter cracked through my loneliness. I see 2 flawed people drawn together not because they were perfect, but because they weren't. And maybe that's the real lesson. Love isn't about finding someone without scars. It's about finding the one whose scars you're willing to trace with your fingers, whose secrets you're willing to carry, even when the weight is unbearable. Because sometimes the greatest danger isn't loving someone who's broken. It's never daring to love at all.